Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about what is the most likely reason your air conditioning unit is blowing hot air or not cold air. And outside of the house there's going to be your AC unit. This AC unit is housing a compressor as well as a fan. So the fan is right here. Its job is to basically blow air through a bunch of fins on the inside. That is what's exchanging the heat that's pulling out from your house. So there's going to be a capacitor inside of this unit for the fan as well as the compressor, and sometimes they've combined the two into one, but we'll see that in a second. And so before you start touching any of this stuff, it's very important to make sure that you've disconnected the power. And so each one of these units has a thing near the wall where you're getting the 240 volts in. So before you start working on any of it, you have a fuse. You just pull it out like this. That disconnects it. These fuses are directional, so if you pointed this up, that's equivalent to turning it off. But I'm just going to leave it right here so that we're really sure that there's no electric current going through this thing. The other thing to note about capacitors is that they do have charge still in them, so before you just touch the old capacitor you could get shocked. So that's why it's very important to discharge it properly with an electric screwdriver. And then once you've located where the electric wires from the thing we just disconnected lead into, generally you're going to have the capacitors near this area. Yours might look different. There might be, a side panel here that you would just take off, but in this case there was just 2 bolts right here, and so you just pull it down like that. We can put this little service panel to the side, and inside of the AC unit we've got 2 capacitors. Sometimes people only have 1 capacitor, and so the bigger capacitor is the one that is for our compressor, and then the smaller one is for the fan. And so the old capacitor that was in here had leads on it that were very rusted. I believe this was out here for about 8 years, and so these capacitors do have service lives and they are replaceable items. So basically what you're going to be doing is just disconnecting these little screws, and then the diameter of these capacitors is different. That's a newer version, it's a little bit smaller. It doesn't really matter, but basically as long as you confirm that your new capacitor has an equivalent capacitance, which in this case is 80 microfarads or UF. Sometimes they'll abbreviate this as MFD, microfarads, or UF, which is the actual 1-letter abbreviation of that. And then you also need to confirm that the voltage rating is correct. So in this case, the capacitor that was in here was rated at 440, and I just made sure that the new capacitor one here was rated up to 450, and then it also has an 80 microfarad plus or minus 5% capacitance. And so after replacing this, it's very simple. You just disconnect these leads, but first, before you touch anything, even though you've disconnected the power, these capacitors do still hold charge. So what you need to do is take something metal, not like a screw, but like a screwdriver where you've got a rubber handle, and then you basically connect the 2 metal leads together, and that will allow the charge on one side of the capacitor to reach the other, so you don't end up sending the charge through yourself. And so once you've discharged the capacitor, you can unscrew these bolts. They depend on whatever unit you have. These are 8 millimeters, but just disconnect those, take pictures to make sure you know where all these leads went, and then shove it back in. And then there's a nice trick where you can just compress down on the little metal bracket, and this is going to help hold the smaller diameter capacitor in place, because usually the replacement capacitors are smaller. And then once you've done that, you can install this all back together, and then hopefully this resolves your issue. So in this case we also have a fan capacitor, but I've already confirmed that the fan is working, so no need to replace the fan capacitor. The only one you need to replace is the condenser. And sometimes on the units where these are both merged into one for sake of simplicity, you just have to replace the whole thing. And in those cases you will there'll be 3 leads in it. or 3 terminals. So like right now you can see we've got 2, but in the case for these ones where they've combined the fan and compressor capacitors, you will only have 1, and then that's where you're just going to take a picture, replace the whole thing. And another thing that's important to note about these capacitors is that they are pretty specialty items, so I do recommend buying an extra one so you have 2, so that if it fails again you've got another one, so you don't need to wait for shipping, because really hard to find these at a hardware store or Home Depot or Lowe's. They don't carry them in the stores, so if you're gonna buy one, buy 2, just so that you always have one on hand in case you need to have cold air. And yeah, that's gonna wrap things up for this video. Once you're done with this, put the side panel back on, and then also make sure to install the fuse back into the circuit breaker on the house. So thank you all for watching, hope it helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and take care.